Hello. Today I'm going to talk about free will and determinism in the context of Stoicism and argue against the Stoic idea that these two concepts are compatible. I think the topic of free will and determinism is interesting because it's relevant to every aspect of our existence. We believe that our identities are shaped by our ability to exert our own free will. Our belief that we have free will is essential to the concept that we are who we are and we do what we do because we make choices on our own accord. Without free will, it would seem that our desires, our interests, and even our actions wouldn't be ours. Instead, these things would simply be manifestations of some predetermined chain of events. Questioning whether or not we have free will is no small matter. In contemplating the absence of free will, one might question the meaning of life itself and ask what quality there would still be in being a sentient creature. This is also an important subject because it ties into moral responsibility, the moral responsibility we have for our actions. If we don't have free will and we are not the ultimate originating cause of our actions, who or what is? And who or what would be responsible for them? Before diving into arguments for the incompatibility of free will and determinism, I would like to start by briefly introducing Stoicism and outlining some of the central beliefs and teachings of the philosophy. The story of Stoicism begins with Zeno of Cyprus, a wealthy merchant that loses all of his possessions when his ship is wrecked in a storm near Athens. Zeno, having lost everything, begins studying philosophy in Athens and becomes heavily influenced by Socrates. Eventually, Zeno begins engaging with pupils of his own and develops the philosophy of Stoicism, naming it after the Stoa Poikile, the public steps where he and his followers gathered. Stoicism developed into a widespread and incredibly influential philosophy. The Stoics believed that everything around us operates according to a web of cause and effect, resulting in a rational structure of the universe, which they called logos. They believed that the natural world was entirely deterministic and that the individual has little control over external events. Because of this, they advocated that one shouldn't burden themselves by dwelling on misfortunate events. Instead, the Stoic becomes empowered by focusing on things that are in their control. That is, their own free will and how they respond to the natural world. The Stoic is charged with implementing reason in every area of their life and diligently practicing the cardinal virtues. Practical wisdom, the ability to logically navigate through tough situations. Temperance, exercising self-restraint and implementing moderation into the areas of one's life. Justice, the pursuit to treat all others fairly despite their disposition towards you. Courage, a staple of Stoicism that is to be implemented in the face of day-to-day challenges as well as the extraordinary. When the Stoic aligns their will with nature, stops fighting the things out of their control, and pursues the virtues in their everyday life, they walk the road to achieving true happiness, a state of tranquility known to the Stoics as ataraxia. Although the Stoic philosophy is attractive and it aims at empowering the individual in the face of a deterministic universe are noble, a closer examination of what true determinism would look like calls into question whether the Stoic could retain any amount of free will. To elaborate on what I briefly mentioned earlier, I would like to dissect the Stoic belief of causal determinism. Causal determinism states that all events through the course of history are connected to the antecedent events that cause them, and that they are in turn themselves the antecedent causes of what must follow after. Put more simply, events occur when they do because they are caused by prior events. And these prior events were caused to occur when they did by yet even prior events. According to this train of thought, There has never been, and there never will be, a single event that is not caused. However, the Stoic holds the belief that although the external world is deterministic, the individual still retains their free will. Moreover, it is the individual's responsibility to use their free will to implement reasoning and rational thinking into their life. Free will is essential to the individual's pursuit of Stoicism, the pursuit of the virtues, and their pursuit of happiness. But how could an individual exert their own free will if each and every one of their actions is simply a byproduct of the antecedent cause that led to it? What aspect of their actions would actually be within their power? Moreover, what power would the individual even have? How could an individual freely choose, have an original thought, or exert their will in any other way if we are to assume that they exist in a universe where each and every occurrence is caused by the happenings of prior instances? It would seem then that the individual and all of their actions that they believed they made out of their own free will were simply the next domino in a determined causal chain of events. At first glance, it appears that, contrary to the Stoic belief of the Stoics, free will and a causally determined universe might not be compatible. Let's explore this further. The opponents of the compatibilist Stoics are the incompatibilists, those who believe that given the setting of a causally determined universe, an individual living in that universe could not have free will. There are typically two main approaches that incompatibilists use to make their arguments. The first approach plays on our intuitive belief that a free agent would have the ability to choose otherwise. And the second approach is centered on the notion that an individual in a determined universe is not the ultimate causal source of his or her actions. Another condition we would intuitively accept as being necessary for our free will. First, let's take a look at the first incompatibilist argument, the determinism and the ability to choose otherwise. This is something that we would normally maintain as a qualification for having free will. If an agent was truly free to exert their will, they would be able to choose between A and B despite everything that led up to that moment. However, if one is to assume that causal determinism is true and that every event is merely the product of its respective antecedent causes, then how could an individual exert their free will to make such a choice? If we're to hold that the theory of causal determinism is true, then no one could ever choose A over B or B over A. The events immediately prior to their choices follow a linear path of cause and effect. The ability to deliberate between picking A or B might be perceived as an agent as authentic, but there wouldn't be any real choice. Instead, A or B, but not both, would have been determined by the antecedent causes in the past and the natural laws of the universe. A or B would be the next in line to happen. Even though an individual might perceive A and B at the same time and think they have a real choice, the antecedent chain of causes would always extend all the way up to one or the other, and the other would have never been an option. If you think you have a choice, but in reality you never did, that's not free will. The lack of the ability to choose otherwise represents a complete compromise in the integrity of an agent's free will. If we, on the other hand, we have the issue of determinism and sourcehood. That is, if determinism is true, then what happened in the past, in combined with the laws of nature, is causally sufficient for the production of every human action. But if this is true, then while an individual is involved in the production of their action, physically carrying it out, that action actually has its source in the causal antecedents that originate outside of them. This means that an individual existing in a deterministic universe isn't the ultimate source of their own actions. How then could such an individual be said to have free will? When an individual acts and exerts their free will, is it not assumed that it's only an act of free will if they alone are the ultimate source of their action? If an outside force compelled an individual to act, it wouldn't be called free will. In this regard, it is the sourcehood of all actions in a deterministic universe, which, existing outside of the individual, robs them of their will to freely act.